Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be doing a crash course on B350 VRMs because people keep messaging me about doing these boards, and I hate low-end stuff. So today we're just going to run through them, just a summary. We're not going to go into the details of how much or, I know which ones are the best, which ones are the worst, because I've done all the calculations for them. I unfortunately didn't bother to write down which ones are the best, what the actual numbers for them work out to be. So, yeah, and if somebody wants to argue with me, I will just whip out, if you want to argue with me down in the comments section below, I will whip out the calculator and get actual numbers. But for just the purposes of this video, we're going to go, we're just going to go over, what's what. A lot of these are very, very similar in terms of power capabilities anyway. But before we get into that, some things you need to keep in mind about Ryzen overclocking. So if you're overclocking Ryzen, the core clock is bound to core voltage. Core voltage and core clock put more higher core voltage, and more core clock put more strain on the V-core VRM. That's the only VRM that actually gets affected by V-core and core clock. So if you go from, say basically if you want to hit 4 gigahertz 1.42 volts, your V-core VRM needs to be able to produce about 100 amps average current under full load. There can be small, spikes in that, but on average, around 100 amps is what your V-core VRM needs to be able to handle. And that's what you need for an 8-core Ryzen CPU at 4 gigahertz 1.42 volts. 1.425 volts is the official maximum safe voltage according to AMD. So, that's why I chose that sort of figure, because that's a Ryzen CPU completely maxed out for daily usage, which is really what you're going to be going for with this class of motherboards. You're not going to be if you want to go benchmarking, just go buy a better motherboard, right? It really is that simple. Because then your objective isn't playing games, your objective is to get high scores, which that's like a concern for me. For most people, the concern is, will my motherboard play... What do people play today? Battlefield. There. So, yeah. So for sort of daily overclocks in 8-core, you're looking at a 8-core 4 gigahertz 1.42 volts. You're looking at around 100 amps. If you do 4.1 gigahertz or 4.2 gigahertz even, then, the current draw is going to be slightly higher. If you can't do 4 gigahertz on 1.42 volts, your current draw may not actually end up being that much lower because your CPU might have higher leakage or something like that, but it's going to hover around 100 amps for 1.42 volts. The big thing for CPU power consumption is generally core voltage, though frequency does also influence power consumption as well. Like from 3 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz, you're going to be seeing a roughly 33% increase in power draw. It's not going to be quite 33%. It's going to be like 30, maybe 28, 27% because just stuff. But it works out that, frequency isn't as bad, whereas voltage is going to exponentially increase your power consumption. Though your current draw is actually linear for voltage and linear with frequency. So, yeah. So for an 8-core, maxed out, you're looking at around 100 amps. If you don't have enough cooling to run 4 gigahertz 1.42 volts and you're looking more at 3.8 gigahertz 1.35 volts, the V-core your V-core current draw is still going to be around 90 amps, even though you're going to be losing about 20 watts of heat output. It's going to, the difference in power consumption is bigger than the difference in current draw because the voltage is part of your power consumption. For 6 cores, you're going to be looking at 4 gigahertz, 1.42 volts, 70 amps. So very big decrease from the 8 cores. And then 6 core at 3.8 gigahertz, 1.35 volts, you're looking at 60 amps. For 4 core Ryzen CPUs at 4 gigahertz, 1.42 volts, you're looking at around 50 amps from the V-core VRM. This really low current figure, 50 amps is absolutely nothing, is basically why I'm going to say if you have a 4 core Ryzen, just max the damn thing out. Seriously, there's no, these things are going to be incredible. These are, I'm not having a hard time cooling my 8-core at 4 gigahertz at all. It's actually, I've done it, I've done all my testing on a 120 millimeter AIO, admittedly with the fan maxed out, but still, it's a 120 millimeter AIO, so nothing incredible. And the 4-core CPUs are just so low power that regardless of what motherboard you have, and I mean by that I include the ones with no heatsink. Those should still be fine running a 4-core maxed out. Because the 4-core at that point just about approaches like the stock power consumption for the Ryzen 8 cores, like the 1800X. And the 1800X is made, like, AMD makes sure that that chip can run on all the motherboards currently being produced. So if it can run a 1800X, it can max out a 4-core. And so with the 4-core chips, I'm saying just like, unless you are on the stock cooler, I'm not sure about the stock cooler on those chips. I never tested it. Max them out. Just run 4 gigahertz daily. Who cares? It's not, it's not going to stress the motherboard, and it's really only a case of having enough cooling for that. In terms of CPU cooling, not motherboard cooling. So with that out of the way, let's start on the MSI boards. Now, MSI has 3 different VRM designs that they are making. They have a 3+2, a 4+2, and a bigger 4+2. Now, MSI's marketing would really like you to believe that they have an 8+2 phase VRM design, but the problem about the RT8894A, which is the voltage controller they use on all of the B350 motherboards, and actually most of the X370 lineup from MSI also uses the RT8894A, which is a Ridgetech voltage controller. It supports a maximum of 4+2 phases, and it integrates it integrates 3 of the phase gate drive circuits. So it integrates 3 of the driver circuits for 3 of the V-core phases, which basically means you cannot double off of this chip, because for doubling you need a PWM signal that you can then split between 2 phases. This doesn't put out any PWM signal for 3 of its phases. It actually just straight on tries to turn on and turn off MOSFETs. So MSI makes a 3+2, a 4+2, and a really big 4+2. They don't actually make an 8-phase. So let's start off with the big one, which would be I look like an 8+2 4-phase, which is this board. This right here is the B350 Gaming Pro Carbon. And the cool thing about this VRM is actually it is the best for both power throughput and efficiency on B350. On the B350 chipset, this is currently king of the VRMs. It's a 4+2 phase controlled. Everybody else is pretty much in the same sort of phase count. Some of the manufacturers are 4+3. Some of them are 4+2. But nobody goes beyond 4 phases of control. Nobody has a better voltage controller than just 4 phases. So in terms of control, this is fine. And then the fact that MSI has literally crammed twice as much of everything means that this VRM basically has more surface area for heat dissipation. And even if you're using really terrible MOSFETs, if you cram enough of them into a phase, they generally don't suck as much. So even with the Nyko PK616BA high side and the PK632 low side FET, which this motherboard has 8 high side FETs and 8 low side FETs in the V-core VRM, they actually get, relatively good efficiency and power capability. It's not comparable to like high-end X370 motherboards, but except the MSI's own X-Power, because that one uses the same MOSFETs, and actually the efficiency on the X-Power is like the same as the efficiency on this, which is kind of depressing, which is why I ripped on the X-Power so much. Because they're using basically the same VR, except the X-Power does get better voltage control, but like voltage stability due to being a 6-phase, like a better voltage controller with 6 phases instead of just 4, but still. This, for B350, is definitely the most powerful and most efficient VRM you can get. It should run the coolest. Speaking about VRM cooling, I've recently had somebody tell me that their VRM is running at 93 degrees, therefore it is not efficient. Newsflash, efficiency is not measured in temperature, because temperature is caused by heatsink size. So if, you wrap something that's really efficient in a blanket, it's still going to run really hot. So, yeah. And VRM, like most motherboard manufacturers these days, the heatsinks are aluminum block things like this. So the VRMs are going to run kind of hot under full load, just because the VRM cooling doesn't have a lot of surface area. Though in the past, you saw VRM heatsinks with like ridiculous amounts of surface area, mostly because those VRMs were way less efficient. So to keep them in sort of the same 100 degrees temperature range, they actually needed more cooling to do it. So these days, as the VRMs get more efficient and the CPUs less power hungry, the heat sinks get more and more miserable because they don't need as much cooling. So yeah, but MSI's big 4+2 phase is, you know, on the Carbon and also on the Crate, and those are the only two boards from MSI on B350 that use that VRM, and this is by far the best VRM you can get, just because there's, you know, it's the biggest one, there's the most phases, well, not most phases, most components, so best heat dissipation and overall current throughput. Now then, just because it's the next one on MSI's site, the MSI 3+2. So MSI's 3+2, which I've done a full breakdown of this motherboard right here, which is the B350M Gaming Pro. This is the only board with MSI's 3+2. It's also a really, really cheap MATX board. This VRM is not great. It can technically run an 8-core with a maximum current capability of around 150 amps off the top of my head. But the problem is the heatsink is kind of anemic. The VRM also isn't, you know, being made up of only 3 phases, which they have put 6 high side FETs and 6 low side FETs into this, so it's not like there's a shortage of MOSFETs, but it is still a rather compact VRM, so it has a high heat density, so it will inherently run hotter than some of the 4+2 phase designs. And due to that, like, I really wouldn't recommend running an 8-core off of this, but you could definitely get away with running a 6-core, no problem. And if you really needed to run an 8-core, it would probably just be a case of zip tying a fan onto the heatsink somehow, onto that VRM heatsink somehow, because that's all you really need to do, usually, to get VRM temperatures under control. But yeah, you know, if you can get a better board, just get a better board in this case. And then let's look at the MSI 4+2. Now, the MSI 4+2 is used on so many boards. It's on this one, it's on that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Basically everything uses the 4+2 phase VRM design. And some of these have really idiotic names. So let's take a look at it. The 4+2 is, again, the same PK616BA MOSFET and high side FET and PK632BA low side FET. Except on the MSI 3+2, you had 6 high side FETs and 6 low side FETs. Here you have 4 high side FETs and 8 low side FETs. The end result is that the overall current capability of this VRM is not that much better than the 3+2, though it will get better voltage regulation just due to being better voltage stability due to being a 4+2 phase VRM instead of a 3+2. And it's bigger and comes with bigger heat sinks, which will mean that this will run cooler, and therefore it is capable of handling more current for, you know, without you having to worry about zip tying fans onto the VRM heatsink or something. So yeah, this, if you plan to run an 8-core on any of the sort of the Tomahawk Arctic, the Mortar, the Bazooka, seriously, PCMate, Pro V8 VDH, like any of these boards will be able to run an 8-core just because the VRM is larger and has more surface area and a bigger heatsink. So it'll just run the VRM basically ends up just running cooler, which does give it that capability to run an 8-core maxed out. If you're looking to run a 4-core or a 6-core, you can definitely get away with just running the B350M Gaming Pro. There's not really any reason to get a higher power motherboard for the 6-core Ryzen CPUs. Now then, so that's the MSI ones. The Gaming Pro Carbon and Crate are really, really nice. Everything else is just fine. And actually, you know, we'll move. Let's get on to the other manufacturers to do the comparisons. Gigabyte. Gigabyte only has one VRM design, and that is a 4+3 phase. And it's kind of miserable. It's actually, yeah, it is by far the weakest of the 4+3s. I still think this VRM design is going to be better than like MSI's 3+2, but it really isn't anything spectacular. They do use it on absolutely everything. Like this board, even to this board, it's the same VRM. It's just a case of this one doesn't have a heatsink and a slightly different layout, whereas this one does have a heatsink and, you know, they've moved over the SoC phases this way. And we can actually tell that they've moved over the SoC phases because these are one high side FET, one low side FET. And if you see one high, one low, or I don't know which, they're probably swapped around. You have one high, one low, one high, one low, one high, one low. So these three inductors are actually on the same phase, and then these four are pulling off of these three MOSFET, like you have the high, 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 and then you have a bunch of low side FETs, which is how we know that this is also a 4+3. Somebody somewhere wrote that this is a 5+2. It's a 4+3. So Gigabyte uses this same 4+3 for all their motherboards. It gets the same efficiency as the MSI 4+2 and the MSI 3+2. However, it can't tolerate as high temperatures because it uses the 4C10N MOSFET from On Semiconductor for the high side and the 4C06N MOSFET for the low side. There's two of the 4C06Ns. And those are fine. There's no problem with the 4C06Ns, which is in fact why the Gaming 3, as a few people who own this board have noticed, there's some of the low side FETs, there's two low side FETs on the back of the PCB. This is fine because the low side MOSFETs on this board aren't the ones that are closest to their absolute maximum rating. If you were to run the VRM, if you were to run an 8-core at 4 gigahertz, 1.42 volts. The high side MOSFET here is really not, well, both of these MOSFETs really can't tolerate that have really high thermal resistance internally. So the MOSFET, the internal temperature of the MOSFET relative to its surroundings is going to be really, really high. So if if you like stick a temperature probe on top of the VRM, and that reads like 125 degrees, then the internals of the MOSFET are way higher temperature above that. And that basically means that this VRM here, even though it gets the same efficiency as, say, the MSI one, can't tolerate as high temperatures as the MSI one. Though as long as you keep it below 110 degrees, it's perfectly capable of powering an 8-core Ryzen CPU. Even if it was to hit 125, it shouldn't cause issues, but I'd hope that at 125 degrees, most motherboard manufacturers implement an over-temperature protection shutdown. So if you actually hit that kind of temperature, the motherboard the VRM should ideally just turn off. If it doesn't do that, that's a bit concerning because the VRM dies, I think, is completely maxed out at around 132 degrees or something, at which point it's not even capable of handling a Ryzen 8 core at all, instead of being just a little bit above the average requirement for a Ryzen 8 core. So yeah, not really a fan of Gigabyte's 4+3 phase VRM design. If you get the Gaming 3, which actually has like a decent heatsink, like the boards with the heatsinks here, I wouldn't really be too concerned about. But the ones with no heatsink, just avoid them unless you have a 4-core. But if you have a 4-core, I have to question why you wouldn't go for like some of the MSI alternatives, unless these are somehow way cheaper as well. But that's really up to you and what kind of price points you find your motherboards at, and also what kind of features you're looking for in your motherboard. So then let's move on to Asus, who I love because they use one VRM and they've only used it on 2 motherboards. And we'll start off with this one. This is the Prime B350M. Now Asus, for their MOSFETs, are using a 4C09B high side MOSFET and a 4C06B low side MOSFET. And there's actually 2 of the low side MOSFETs for the V-core phases. The VRM is a 4+2 phase design, and they use it on both this board as well as the Plus. The Plus gets heat sinks. This doesn't get heat sinks. On that basis alone, don't get this. Like, seriously, there's other MATX boards with actual VRM heat sinks and similar current capabilities built by MSI. Just go for those, or even go for Gigabytes if that's also cheaper. Like, seriously, just don't go for these because there's no heatsink on these. Now the 4C09B and the 4C06B, the 4C09B is better than the 4C10N, and is in fact the datasheet for this the B variant of this MOSFET is identical to the N variant. So the 4C09N datasheet is actually applicable for this board. And this VRM is a bit more efficient than, say, the MSI 4+2, the MSI 3+2, and the Gigabyte 4+3. So this should inherently run cooler. It also has better thermal tolerance than the Gigabyte 4+3 because the 4C09B is just a better MOSFET than the 4C10N. End result being is that, yeah, I'm actually getting the B350 Plus board sometime soon, either like Monday or Tuesday. I should have this board, and the reason being, there is a competition on HWBot, which is run by Asus, so the restriction is Asus motherboards, and I decided that I'm gonna run Ryzen for benchmarking 3D Mark Time Spy, and the plan is to put Ryzen on liquid nitrogen, and I didn't really want to spend a lot of money on competition hardware, so I just went for this board right here. So hopefully I don't blow up the VRM. It should just about handle it as long as I don't try to push really high core voltages. In terms of actual current capability, this 4+2 phase design from Asus falls into the same category as like the MSI 3+2 and the MSI 4+2. But it is more efficient, so it should run cooler, and actually you should be able to push more current just because it doesn't run as hot. Because VRM current capability is also tied to VRM operating temperature. So, you know, this is sort of, I guess, a step. This would be definitely a step up from the MSI 4+2 and the MSI 3+2, as well as the Gigabyte 4+3. At least in the vCore department, Gigabyte's three-phase SoC VRM probably is is better than everybody else's +2 SoC VRM. The problem is the SoC portion of Ryzen CPUs as of right now doesn't really pull that much power, at least not enough power to be worth worrying about the VRM that powers it. Plus you don't really want to push very high voltage through the SoC anyway. So I'm ignoring that VRM for these breakdown, for this rundown, because it's basically not important for overclocking. For the B350M-A, I recommend don't get it, no heatsink, unless you're on a 4-core. Again, the 4-core will run on just about anything. Now then, let's get on to Asrock. Asrock has two VRM designs. They have a 3+3 and a 4+3. The high side MOSFET, they use a 3+3 and a 4+3. Now, a lot of people would be wondering, like, what? Where's the 4+3? I mean, the 3+3, because this right here is very obviously a 4+3, but this looks a lot like a 6+3. Except it isn't a 6+3, it's a 3+3, because the voltage controller here is the 4+3 phase ISL 95712, and the 95712 integrates some of the phase drive circuits, so you can't double off of it. Not properly anyway. And what Asrock actually ended up doing is they've put 2 inductors and 2 high side MOSFETs and 2 low side MOSFETs into each phase. So essentially you get it runs like a 3+3, except it's really big. Sort of similar to the MSI, like the same idea as the MSI 8 phase, which is actually just a 4+2 with a lot more components in every single phase. The end result is that this is even more efficient than the Asus 4+2. It's not as good as the MSI 8+2, just because that, has a whole extra block. But this is a 3-phase, so it won't have the voltage regulation and voltage stability on this should be worse than on the 4-phase designs. How much that'll impact overclocking, I can't say. It's basically impossible to tell without testing motherboards, in the real world. If you have one of these, I wouldn't be worried about overclocking an 8-core Ryzen on this, no problem. It'll handle it in terms of power throughput. And if you're running a 6-core or a 4-core, I said, if it can run an 8, it can run a 6. So there's no concern with those. The heatsinks on these are actually pretty decent. A good amount of surface area and relatively large, unlike, say, Gigabytes, which really are just blocks of aluminum on the heatsinks. Sitting on top of the MOSFETs, and the 6+3 is used on the Pro 4, I think this too? Oh no, this is actually a 4+, wait. Well, now I'm confused. Well, actually not, that's okay, this is just a spaced out version of the, this is just a spaced out version of the 3+3, though it looks like they changed the SoC MOSFET setup. Either way, this will be the same. Actually, no, they might have dropped a low side FET. Okay, I'm not sure about this one. I haven't seen it before. I didn't know it exists. Damn. But yeah, the Pro 4 uses it. The B350M Pro 4 uses the 3+3 and the B350 Gaming K4. Those are all the 3+3 phase VRM. Same all of them use the same SM4337 high side FAT and the 4336 low side FAT. It's weaker than the MSI 8+2. Well, 8+2 in quote 8 in quotation marks +2, and it's stronger than the 4+2 from Asus. So yeah, that about sums it up. And then there's this thing, but this has no heatsink, so I would recommend just avoiding it unless you're running a 4-core. So yeah, that about covers it. So in summary, this board and that board have the best V-Core VRM of all the B350 boards currently available. Asus is going to be launching some new B350 boards soon. Gigabyte currently has the worst VRM as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's the weakest of the 4+. Like, it's just straight up the weakest VRM you can get. Asus, with their 4+2 phase design, is sort of in third place in terms of power capability. Yeah, third place power capability wise, but the voltage regulation, it'll actually have, like, it's second for voltage regulation, just because, and it might actually even be first. I'm not sure. I'd have to check if the motherboard supports really high, like raising the switching frequency beyond what the other boards support, because all the other motherboards max out at like 400 or 500 kilohertz. So for voltage stability, this might be a winner, even though that would actually throw the efficiency out the window if you do that. And it really might not help you with overclocking at all. Then Asrock is second place for both power throughput and efficiency, but lagging behind in the voltage stability department just because they're running a 3+3 instead of like a 4+3 or a 4+2 phase design. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope, you know, that this level of non-detail is fine for everybody. You know, if you have any questions or comments or complaints, you can leave them down in the down below in the comment section. And yeah, that's that. So like, share, subscribe, and if you would like to support what I do here at Actually Hardcore Overclocking, I have a Patreon and a PayPal, and there's also shirts, and you can find all of those down in the description below. You can also find my article on how, well, my post to the Actually Hardcore Overclocking blog on how I got my Ryzen V-Core power consumption numbers. You can find that down in the description as well. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.